In this video, we're going to continue what we have been doing with XML validation. We're going to slow down a little bit this time, and we are going to look at the debugger with C# and Visual Studio. Now, why is debugging important? You've maybe heard the acronym Plan, Do, Check, Act, or Plan, Do, Check, Adjust. So we want to periodically stop and take a look at our work and make sure that it's doing what we think we're doing, especially if we're doing things that are not routine, things that are a bit experimental in nature. One nice thing about the debugger is it allows you to view the program at your own pace, so you can watch it run step by step. And in many debuggers, you can actually change values in memory and do a bit of what-if analysis. Now, one big reason for using the debuggers is, as programmers, what do we really do? Well, you've probably seen memes. You've probably seen memes like this before. What my friends think I do, what my mom thinks I do, what society thinks I do. And as programmers, your mom thinks that you write iPhone apps all day long, and many other people probably think the same thing. You probably think you're going to be writing your own code most of the time, but in reality, a lot of our jobs as programmers is to understand and dissect what somebody else did. So become a problem solver. One of the best programmers I know used to be a copy machine repairman. He was good at taking something apart that he may have had limited knowledge about, figuring out how it works, and then putting it back together and fixing it. And in many ways, that's what we do. So I have the same page up that we worked on previously, so that's still running. I'm going to run over to Visual Studio, and I'm going to snap a few breakpoints. First of all, I will go to If Is Postback. I simply right-click and choose Breakpoint and Insert Breakpoint, just like so. We can watch that work through. Now our Validate button, I can right-click and I can set a breakpoint here. Now I do like breakpoints. We do want to be careful about where we put breakpoints, because they can get annoying if we have too many. I'll put another one in our Validate XML method, and a couple more to go. I'll put one on the LBL status text, so we can do a bit of what-if analysis on that. So set a breakpoint here, and let's set a breakpoint in our finally, right up here. Right-click breakpoint, insert breakpoint, and one more. We'll do a couple more. We'll do one here in the catch, and finally one in the validate event handle. So right-click breakpoint, insert breakpoint. So now we have several breakpoints going throughout our application, which will give us quite a bit to look at. So let's go back to our form, and let's choose our file, and we'll go with our plain old plants XML. Notice that no breakpoints hit because so far we have not posted anything. We have not done a post back. But as soon as I click validate, sure enough, notice that our breakpoint hits. Now take a look down here at locals. This is one of our best friends. This is going to show us what we have in memory and what those values are in memory. So watch that as we go through the debugger. Also, a note on debugging. Take a look under debug. You see step into, step over, and continue. So step over is F10, step into is F11, continue is F5. These are probably some of the most important commands that we want to remember when we're debugging. Additionally, a caution here. I've used Visual Studio, NetBeans, Eclipse, and IntelliJ, and I can tell you from experience they all use different shortcut keys for the debugger. So just be aware of that, be cautious of that, because you might hit one key thinking you're doing a step over when actually it's a continue, which confusing those keys can be a mistake. So by the way, what is step over, step into, and continue? Step over means execute this line, move to the next. Step into means if we're on a method call, go into that method call. Continue means I'm all finished debugging for the moment, thank you very much. Keep executing the program until you see the next breakpoint. So at this point, I have kind of a highlighter color here, which means that the computer is waiting on me to give it permission to continue. So I'm going to press F10, which means execute this line, move to the next. Okay, you see it moves to the open curly. It also gives me a little bit of elapsed time. on how long that took. Also, as I mouse over, you notice it says is postback equals true. So it shows me the value of these variables as I'm walking through my program. Okay, validate false. Okay, now we get our server path. Okay, so I can mouse over path here, and you can see that it is giving me the path, the fully qualified path, all the way from root down to this XML directory. So as we execute a line, we can mouse over and we can look at the variables on each of these lines. Okay, so what we're doing right now, if you remember from the earlier video, we're simply looking at the file extension of the file that the user is trying to upload, and we are making sure that it is valid. So you see right here we have a test going on. File extension, okay, that's the extension the user is trying to upload. We got that from line 29. You see that's .xml. Allowed extensions is the series of extensions that we're allowing the user to upload. And then the double equal is an equality expression. It's saying, is the item on the left equal to the item on the right? Don't confuse double equal and single equal. Single equal means assignment. It means take what's on the right and assign it to what's on the left. But double equal is what we'll typically have in an if test, which means return true if these two things are equal. In other words, if .xml is a permitted file extension, which indeed it is. So F10, we go ahead, walk over that line. We say we have a valid file. Now we're going to save this file, and we get a message that the file is changed on disk. Not a surprise because I've uploaded this file several times. Okay, now we change the status on our page. It probably won't reflect just yet. No, not just yet. But nonetheless, when it redraws the page, when it re-renders the page, it will go ahead and upload that text. And now for future use, we save that file name. And at this point, we're in good shape, so I'm going to choose F5, which means continue running. So F5, notice the next thing to invoke is the button validate click handler. So it actually processes this page load in isPostback before the button validate click handler. There's another good reason to use the debugger. You can look at the exact sequence in which certain things process. So we say, okay, do we have a valid file name? Yes, we do. So oops, you see, I just did what I said not to do. I used the wrong key. I used the F8 key. So let me go back and see if I can recover where I was. Just one moment. We were in XML upload AS. Okay, good. There we go. So choose F10 and say, yeah, that's good. And now watch carefully. Do you see how the yellow line is on a method call to validate XML? This is where that F11 and F10 make a difference. F10 would say, execute this line, execute this method. I don't care what's inside. I'm going to treat it like a black box. On the other hand, F11 says, I want to have a peek into this method, so let me F11. And now the debugger goes down to this validate XML method. And we see now we're going to set up our XML reader. We're going to give it the settings to say we're going to use XSD validation, look for the schema location, report any warnings, and then if something goes wrong, let's hook it up to this validation event handle method that I have described down below. So do a little setup for our XML parse. Okay, now associate the file that we're trying to parse with the settings that we have just set up. Make a little marriage between these two. Now you see this is a method call again. Line 74 is a method call. I could F11 to step into that, but instead I'm going to choose F10 and say execute and simply move to the next line. Now why is that? That's because XML Reader is a class that comes provided to us from .NET. I don't care how it works internally. I just know that it works when used as directed, so I'm good with that. Now, this part we're going to see, I'm going to hit F10 several times because this is reading each line in the XML and it's validating it. So you see, we're going to sit here for a little bit. One thing that's interesting, if you look down at the locals below, you'll have a view of what line we're on, roughly. So you see now it says genus. Now it's looking at the text value Cercis. Okay, and I'm going to species. I'm going to go a little bit faster because we get the hang of it, and this document should validate. But if you look as I click through, if you look at that red text, you can see as it's reading the XML file that we've uploaded, one line at a time. So we keep going, and we should eventually get to line number 78, assuming that this is valid. So let's see, we're going to go a little bit faster. I can just, you know what, I'll save us some time. I'll hit F5, and I'll tell it, go ahead, just take me to the next breakpoint. Now, this file is valid, so you see it goes to validation passed, so it's going to update that text label on the screen that the user sees. And now watch very carefully as I hit F10. Watch what the next executable line is. Watch very closely. I'm currently on 78. I choose F10. And note we drop down to finally. Note that we passed over catch. And the reason why we passed over catch is everything executed as it should have. We didn't encounter any exceptions. But remember that finally is going to execute regardless of whether or not we had an exception, because this is a good place to go in and close any resources, and we can have some knowledge that, hey, it's likely that this is going to get called even if we had an exception, because it's in a finally block, and a finally block will get called in any scenario. One footnote there, of course, if we were to lose power unexpectedly or the program were to crash, the finally block would not execute. If something completely abnormal happened like that, the finally would not execute. But in other scenarios, we know it will. So I choose F5, I come back to our page, and we see that validation passed. Now, let's do that debugging exercise one more time, but this time let's intentionally introduce an error into our XML file. So I'll say foo and bar and save. I'm putting this up towards the top so that we can see the error early so we don't have to step through a whole lot. So choose File, we choose our old friend again, and validate, okay? And you notice it's going to give us kind of a, it's going to give us a little waiting state here, a little hourglass, which indicates it's waiting on us. Sure enough, I go back, and we see it's waiting on our page load. We've already stepped through this before, so I'm going to choose F5 and let it continue. We see that the next thing to happen is our validate button click handler. So we F10 this, F10, we F11 so we can watch it validate. Now we step into the validation method we got here by our F11, and the first few lines are going to work as they always have, no change there. Okay, we marry together our settings and our file, and now what's going to happen is we're going to validate, and we're anticipating a failure. I do not expect that we're going to land on line 78. I suspect we're going to come down to this method, validation event handle, and we're going to throw an exception. And I want you to watch very closely what happens when we throw that exception. So note as I F10, we're going to be on line 77 for a little while until it hits our invalid tag. And note that, oh, there we go. Note that we were staying on line number whatever that was, 77. Now, we've come to the place where we've reached a validation error. And let's see what the validation error is. You see, I can mouse over and I can read the element plant has invalid child element foo. List of possible elements expected, genus. If we were to go and do the validation directly in Notepad++, what would we see? A very similar error name. Element foo, this element is not expected. Expected is genus. So a very similar name. But watch closely. What happens when I choose F10 on line 98? Where do I go next? Watch very closely as I choose F10. Notice I skip and I go right to the catch block. Something went wrong, so it goes to the catch block. The catch block is going to update our label, which actually is kind of redundant with our validation handler, but nonetheless, it updates the label, then it goes to the finally, and at this point we're done. So if you compare this debug session with the last one, you'll notice that this debug session was a little bit faster because as soon as it encounters an invalid element, I told it to throw an exception, okay? And when we throw an exception, it says, okay, if I'm within a try-catch block, I'm going to skip whatever's remaining in the try-catch block, and I'm going to go straight to the catch. The catch will only execute if there was an exception, if there was an error, and then I'll go to finally. So that's try catch finally. That can be a bit confusing if you have not seen it before, but this is where a debugger is really handy because it allows you to take a look and actually watch what happens. And that can really help you decide where to put the try, where to put the catch, where to put the finally, how to handle an exception like this, if even exception handling is the right thing to do in this case. Nonetheless, I did get the error message I was expecting, so I am happy. I got the error message on this page that I was expecting, so I am happy that indeed it did do what I thought. So that'll wrap us up for this video, and actually I believe that wraps us up for the entire XML validation sequence. In the next series of videos, we're going to take a look at web services in Visual Studio.net. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.